Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. Today we're talking with John and Luigi DiRuocco of Mr. Espresso in Oakland, California. Okay, everybody. Well, today I'm really excited because we're going to be talking with John and Luigi DiRuocco, who are the sons of Carlo Di Ruocco, who founded Mr. Espresso in Oakland, California. Now, Mr. Espresso was established in 1978, celebrating 45 years in business. They were founded when I was born, 1978. Mr. Espresso is a specialty coffee roasting company. It stayed true to the Italian coffee culture and roots of the founder, Carlo Di Ruocco. Over the decades, Mr. Espresso has truly shaped the landscape for espresso, having made its mark as one of the first full-service coffee roasting retailers in the U.S., and has since become a trusted supplier to noteworthy restaurants, cafes, bakeries, coffee houses around the San Francisco Bay Area and nationally. Speaking of staying true to the Italian coffee culture, Mr. Espresso uses traditional wood roasting methods over oakwood, a technique that results in higher moisture content and an increased retention of natural oil, producing complex and full-bodied coffees with less acidity. And Mr. Espresso has received numerous high-scoring reviews and accolades over its long history. They're a two-time Good Food Awards winner for organic single-origin coffees, and the founder, Carlo Di Ruocco, was awarded the 2015 Alfred Peet Passionate Cup Award, which is one of the Specialty Coffee Association's most prestigious awards. And most recently, Mr. Espresso has opened their first cafe in downtown Oakland, not far from its roastery in Jack London Square. And we're going to be talking about all of that rich history and legacy and how it all happened and the values behind it with Carlo's sons, John and Luigi. So John DiRuocco is co-owner and vice president for Mr. Espresso and co-owner of The Cafe by Mr. Espresso. That's their coffee shop. After earning an undergraduate degree in architecture from UC Berkeley and receiving his degree, he returned to the family business, learning the art of wood roasting coffee from his father. And John went on to become roastmaster in the early 90s and eventually vice president of coffee. And John has moved the company forward as a leader in both single origin and blended coffees, and has been instrumental in expanding the offerings to reflect the changing coffee preferences, adding distinguished lighter roasted coffees, most often organic and fair trade in origin. Now, Luigi DiRuocco is also co-owner and sales and marketing vice president of Mr. Espresso, and also co-owner of their newly opened cafe called The Cafe. As an alumnus of St. Mary's College, Luigi earned a double major in business administration and economics, followed by 2 years in portfolio accounting. However, in 2001, at the age of 24, Luigi returned to the family business, drawn by the opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to the family enterprise. And in 2007, as partner in the opening of San Francisco's 3 coffee bar locations. Currently, Luigi is at the helm of the newly opened The Cafe by Mr. Espresso in the heart of downtown Oakland. So I am really excited to talk with both Luigi and John about the rich history, legacy, and how everything has come together and evolved over these 45 years, drawing from their earliest memories as they grew up in it and officially in their current roles. We talk about the wood roasting, the entry of third wave and how that impacted what they do, how they stay steady with their values and embrace change as it makes sense to them, but reinforce tradition all along the way. This all has led to what is today a truly iconic brand with a legacy that any of us would be really thrilled to even have a fraction of with our businesses. And so grateful for this opportunity. Again, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with John and Luigi DiRuocco of Mr. Espresso. All right. Well, Luigi, John, welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you today?
Great. Thank
We're
you.
good. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And congratulations are in order for your first ever coffee shop, correct?
Correct. We opened up the doors to our first coffee shop. It's called The Cafe by Mr. Espresso on May 22nd. So it's been a little bit over a month.
Oh, wow. Definitely want to get into that. And again, that's really cool. And Obviously, there's been a lot happening in the coffee world since the 70s until now. And having that first cafe expression is obviously a huge deal. But in the beginning, now you're all both, working in the business and running the business. And I want to kind of get as much history as we can about the founding of Mr. Espresso and the mission and the drive for what you all do, because it's unique in the world, especially today's world. I think it kind of came from the old world, if I'm not mistaken. So tell me a little bit about how Mr. Espresso got started and what was the idea behind it.
Well, our father, Carlo Di Ruocco, he's an Italian immigrant, and he came over to the United States with our mother, who's French. The family was living in France at the time, but when they first immigrated to the United States, my older brother, John, who's here with us, and our sister, Laura, they were both born in France. And so when they came over to the United States, my father, he saw that it was difficult to find a good espresso here in the United States, which was predominantly a drip coffee drinking country. He saw an opportunity to help introduce authentic Italian espresso to the United States. The espresso scene was just starting here, but it was still spread out pretty few and far in between. He first started to import commercial espresso machines from Italy and reselling them to local restaurants and cafes. Thus, he became known as Mr. Espresso. As a teenager growing up in his hometown of Salerno, Italy, which is in southern Italy near the Amalfi Coast, he had worked for a local company that was roasting coffee, and they used wood as the fuel source to roast their coffee with. And so soon after he launched the equipment side of the business here in the United States, he then started to sell the oakwood. He was using oak also to roast our coffee with. So he started selling the oakwood roasted coffee to the same clients who had bought machines from him. That kind of spawned our wholesale business of selling coffee and equipment to local clients, from the very early years of the company having been launched. And so the mission, I believe, at the time for him was simply to help introduce authentic Italian style espresso to the United States. And I think today, after all these years, it remains the same. It's not our only mission, but the authentic Italian espresso aspect of the business still remains one of our primary drivers as a company, is to keep, Italian espresso done from a quality driven approach at the forefront of what we do, and keep it in the conversation within the coffee industry.
Well, that's really interesting because, in the time that your father started this business, this is the time when, I'm going to get the dates wrong, but I know Alfred Peet was around that time. And there was this dark roast, like everyone was thinking, oh, we can actually get dark roasted coffee, and it's different than what's around. And Southern Italian espresso is known as a little bit more developed in flavor, as from Northern Italy and etc. So it seems like such a perfect time, because it seems to be in the air, especially where you are in California. That, to me, it seems like that's when everything was kind of happening for darker roasted coffees, and everybody is just really wanting to be international and exotic with their flavors, And so I don't know, maybe the 70s and the 80s were really good for Italian culture. So, but especially with espresso, I imagine that helped a lot.
Yeah, we like to link coffee a lot within the context of food. So around that time, the whole movement of farm to table or in California cuisine, that was all starting around that time also. So we feel like coffee was a category within that overall movement. I mean, basically, just like coffee in the United States was pretty lousy, it was like that for all categories of food. The quality and the nutrition content and the health of most of the food that the country was eating was not in a good place. So and the way food tasted either. So, I mean, I was born in '77, so John might have some more like direct experience with this topic. But as far as people within the food movement, it was this about rediscovering the idea of using high quality ingredients and also, preparing them in a way where they can speak for themselves. So, and in coffee, the early pioneers in the coffee industry, I think, were after the United States had been drinking coffee that was largely, poor quality, really, really weakly brewed. Most people don't realize a lot of it was also light roasted. So you had, crappy, watered down, low quality coffee. I think what someone like Alfred Peet's helped reintroduce was just bringing a much more robust flavor of coffee into people's cups. And I think that caught people's attention. Our father came into the scene around that time too, with his style of roasting. His first blend was the Neapolitan style espresso.
Yeah.
So that was a taste of Southern Italy. He tried to roast it as directly as he could to how he remembers it tasting growing up near Naples, because he's from Salerno's about half an hour from Naples.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt like growing up that Naples had the best coffee in Italy. And so that was the style he emulated. And it was around, classic Italian style blend, but, the coffee's mostly roasted around a, medium to medium dark roasted level.
As Luigi mentioned, there was most coffee then was very light and it was poorly brewed. So usually people would use like standard way to brew coffee was to use 2 ounces for half-gallon brewer to sit on a burner for until it gets consumed. And then there was this exotic coffee called espresso that was mostly drunk in Italian restaurants or places like university cities like Berkeley or Santa Cruz, more drunk among university students. But I think espresso kind of had fallen into the pigeonhole of it being dark roasted, quote unquote. And it was just, it was just any kind of coffee you can get your hands on and roast it as dark as you can roast it without burning it. And of course, it was just very poorly brewed. People wanted a full cup and they wanted to come out in about 10 seconds. So there wasn't really an authentic espresso. There was just something that fit this idea of what espresso was, I guess. So my dad, his whole life is about food, and he had this background in coffee from when he was younger. So at the time he really was frustrated because he couldn't find, you could find espresso, but he couldn't find an espresso that represented what he thought an espresso should be like, the espresso that, you could find in Naples or maybe in other cities as well. But so he was really trying to introduce an espresso that had more nuanced flavors, was more of a medium roast, something that actually, tasted like coffee and was properly prepared and a little bit more what resembled, the coffee in Italy. So that was really a lot of the motivation for what he was doing.
Now, the wood roasted coffee is traditional, and I see obvious value of having something that is as authentic as possible from preparation to taste, because you could make it taste that way, but then if you made it a different way, it makes it even more authentic that you actually used the implements that you were experiencing back in Italy. So doing that in the States, though, I mean, maybe it wasn't as big of a deal back then. There was a lot more coal fire cooking back then, I guess, less regulation. I mean, was that a pretty unique thing back in the 70s and 80s? And how did it go in terms of marketing that this is wood-fired coffee, like we're fueling the roaster with wood, and here's why that matters?
Definitely, there wasn't anyone roasting coffee at the time with wood, not in this country. So it was definitely unique. It helped to launch the brand because it gave us a little bit of a different marketing standpoint and also a slightly different flavor profile as well.
What is that difference in terms of flavor profile?
Our feeling is that the wood roasting, when we roast with wood, we're not flavoring coffee or we're not smoking coffee. If you taste our light roast, you're not going to find any smoky or any woody flavors in those light roasts. The main difference with the wood roasting is the moisture content of the heat. So when you roast with gas, the local gas, here is PG&E. local gas company will dry the gas before they send it through the pipes because, the moisture would corrode the pipes. So the gas heat is very, very dry. The wood's about 15% moisture. So the heat that's produced has a higher moisture content. So and most of that moisture is driven off at the beginning of the roast. So basically what we end up doing is extending the drying phase. The first phase of roasting is the drying phase when you're trying to, you're drying the coffee from about, 10 to 12% to 2 to 3%, and we're using a more humid source of heat to do that. So what we're doing is extending that drying phase, and we feel that the result of that is that you have a coffee that's a little bit lower in acid, but it's also a little bit, the body and the sweetness are more developed, which are kind of ideal for espresso, for producing a nice balanced sweet espresso.
Well, it's really interesting that, your whole system relies upon the inputs and then you've dialed everything into the idiosyncrasies of that fuel source. And it creates such a unique product that is distinctly yours. And as people started to consume it and become, more, what would you say, gourmands, I guess, more discerning in the idea of what espresso is. How did Mr. Espresso start to expand offerings in terms of blends? Because obviously today you offer more than just a Southern Italian espresso blend. And so as the years went on, how did more variety get introduced?
Well, I think, we realized we wanted to sell more than just espresso. We thought we could also make, coffee for drip coffees. So, and, that would also expand our sales at the same time. So we pretty quickly realized we also had to produce, we had the drip coffees as well. And, we've been around so long that we've seen a lot of changes. So at the time, most people want, the latest fashion, I guess, was dark roasted coffees. The established coffee was the lighter roast, and then people who wanted specialty coffee at the time wanted dark roast. We kind of had both. We had light roast for some people who wanted something more traditional, and the dark roast for people who wanted something more contemporary. Of course, things are kind of flipped now. So but we still kind of do the same thing. We always try to. We're not very dogmatic about coffee. We just think coffee should be good, but we don't just we don't subscribe to any particular dogma about light roast or dark roast or medium roast. We try to have coffees that meet different people's taste, I guess.
In terms of the ability to meet people's tastes and changing things in the roastery and what you offer, it feels like, at least from an outsider's perspective, that you're pretty consistent. Where somebody might look at a trend and be like, oh, this is something we need to do. We need to do this right now, or else, catastrophe. It feels like there's a little bit more time that might pass where somebody who is a little bit more steeped in tradition would say, okay, it seems like now is the time that we need to change, but it's not going to be, like you said, you used the word dogmatic. It's not so quick. It's more consider your options. And as you consider your options, what is it that you're considering outside of the fact that people might buy this? Is it just making sure that it doesn't water down what you already do, or what goes into that decision?
Yeah, I think maybe Luigi could weigh on this too, but I think for me, we're not against progress. We always think things should move forward. So we're open to new ideas and new ways of doing things and technology and and things like that. But we also don't necessarily are going to hop on the latest trend. So we kind of look at what's out there. We're always reading the same things everybody else is reading, and we're just trying to see, does this make sense for us? Do we think this is going to be good for our customers, or do we think this is something we believe in, or we think this is going to make our product better? Then yeah, if it answers those questions, then we'll do it. But sometimes you see some things and you're like, oh, this doesn't make any sense, or this isn't going to work for us. So then we don't really.
I think part of it for us is that we're a wholesaler, or we've always been a wholesaler. And so while our clients do want to be up on the trends, they don't want to be on a roller coaster ride either. They want to be able to ensure consistency on their end. And so from that perspective, we didn't want to start constantly trying to introduce the latest trend when 6 months later or a year later it could be irrelevant or not something that was going to be something that stood the test of time. And to John's point also, we already have quite a bit of experience in the coffee industry, and we've always been pretty in tune with quality and like what produces good quality and just basically the fundamentals of proper espresso and coffee brewing. And so, having had that experience and knowing what we're trying to do as a roaster and as a company, I would say our instincts have been pretty good most of the time as far as like seeing something that's new come out, and then we're like, I don't really know if that makes anything better. So we're kind of, sometimes we'll just kind of pass on things
Okay.
and just stand on the sidelines on certain things. And other things, you might try it out and it's pretty intriguing, but you may want to wait for a while to see if it stands the test of time also.
When you say the test of time, part of me thinks it's not just that, it's the fact that it's got to prove itself to you. It's
Hmm.
got to prove itself to your family. And the intuition that you just mentioned, a lot of people will outsource their intuition to algorithms or to, data, things like that. And we undersell instinct a lot of times. I've told people this when I've trained baristas. I'm a well-trained barista. I've been doing coffee for a couple decades, and I could work an espresso machine and make a shot of espresso the exact same way, technically the same way as somebody else, but mine tastes better. Doing it longer. And I don't know how, and it's really spooky, but obviously you all have built up this intuition that allows you to kind of filter these things. I think that's really cool.
Right. And it comes with experience. And so I think you definitely have to trust it. I would say that like in the early years of like the third wave era, as us, we were a bit flat-footed as far as how we were positioned. We had always kind of been regarded highly in the local like food community, but then a lot of things that were working for us before, referrals and word of mouth business for us was strong. But as things kind of became more digital and online, I don't think we were well positioned for that time. And a lot of new companies started to emerge, occupy, a space that we used to occupy. And then we started to be viewed a bit like as, an established company. Perhaps I like the term old school, but, it didn't, maybe old school or old fashioned even might have been how we were perceived. And that really is not how we viewed ourselves at all. You know what I mean? And so we knew that there was kind of like we had a little bit of an issue there in marketing and representing ourselves better. And so we got to kind of to work on that over the last 10 or 15 years to try and rectify that.
It's interesting that you say we're flat-footed, and this whole wave obviously is something that happened as a result of the success of another one. That
Right.
you reach a saturation point, and then everyone becomes collectively bored. We all decide somehow that we're going to do something else, and the ones that are the most consistent, the legacy brands that stay around, they often at the end of a wave will find themselves back in favor with
Right.
general public, and people that never went away just say, hey, we've always been buying your coffee and we always love it, and we never did appreciate hot grapefruit juice in espresso the way that early third wave espresso was just really difficult to enjoy.
Right.
I've perpetuated that in my younger years myself in coffee, but I did grow up in the 90s and 80s. Luigi, I was born in 1978, and
Uh-huh.
right when their company was founded. And so when I got introduced to coffee, I was part of this, like more developed coffee was on my palate. And so today we see third wave accepting more developed coffees, more blends, more espresso, darker flavors, deeper flavors. How has that impacted what you all do? Have you seen that resurgence of interest from an even younger demographic as a result of that?
I'll go backwards a little bit to finish my thought. We were always a little bit second guessing how much we should jump on what's happening out there. Like what John was saying, we've always tried to have an offering that was reflective of consumer demand and roasted coffees from light to dark. And we've always had single origin coffees It wasn't like a new thing that was invented with the third wave. As we, you know, did evaluate ourselves as a company during that time, we did start to realize that, it wasn't necessary to constantly be concerned about what was going on out in the industry. To be aware and to keep up with it, yes, but we started to become more focused on what we do and to really embrace that. And also just from some of the the quirkiness and the stuff that doesn't make sense of being a family business, we just kind of started to realize that there were some things we probably weren't going to be good at either, and just to focus on our strengths and what makes us unique. The more we did that and the better we got at it and just kind of embraced that, I think we people did start to also appreciate it at the same time. And then we became something that was different than what was out there to a certain extent. We, I think, just solidified ourselves as being a more unique and a slightly different option than what everything else that was out there at the time and still today.
Oh, indeed. Yeah. And the company's legacy is in the knowledge of Mr. Espresso. Obviously, this is something that plays a big part in, people trying the coffee and experiencing something that is set apart, is born from, like we mentioned, your intuition for how you're roasting, how you're sourcing the coffee. And I'm interested to learn a little bit about your sourcing of coffee and how that's evolved over the years as different practices on the farms have evolved. And by and large, it feels like coffee has become higher quality just as a raw product. Talk to us a little bit about how Mr. Espresso has evolved in sourcing and how that increase in quality over time has impacted the brand and the product.
I do the sourcing for Mr. Espresso. There hasn't been an enormous change in the way we source. We've always sought quality coffees. We've always sought to work with the best producers, the best importers that met our needs. So it hasn't been an enormous shift. Our focus is more on creating long-lasting relationships. A lot of producers, what they're trying to do is akin to like winning the lottery, where they're trying to produce a 88-point coffee, 86-point coffee, and then with the hope that then there's a buyer out there to buy it. So what we try to do is we try to work with people that are producing consistently high quality coffees year after year, and that they know that they're going to be paid fairly, year after year, and that there's going to be a market for their coffee. So most of the coffees that we purchase by the container. We do some small lots. We do some beautiful small lots where, sometimes with different processes and so on. But the majority of the coffee is container sized coffees with producers and organizations that pay a fair price to the producers and treat their producers well.
So once you get this coffee in, there's just a whole process that every roaster goes through for quality control and to go through and determine that, these components are what they're supposed to be, and they're going to serve the end goal of this particular blend, which I imagine your goal with your original blends especially have really not changed over the years. But what is the protocol like to really take a coffee from raw product to approved blend that you're proud to sell?
Sure. Well, and at times we're looking for new producers. So we work with our importers to try to identify new producers. And once we find a producer that we think is going to work for our needs, then we start to, sample the coffees. We might start first by buying, a smaller amount of that coffee, try to see how it works in our lineup in our roast. And then once we've determined that it's going to work for our needs, then we start to, get into larger quantities, making site visits, to origin, writing contracts. It's probably similar to, I would imagine how a lot of roasters do it.
Well, you mentioned your needs, and I'm curious about that term, especially with your volume and your method with wood roasting. And if that impacts, there's certain coffees react or respond better than others, and maybe shed some light on what Mr. Espresso's unique needs are when it relates to coffees that are selected to be part of that lineup.
Sure. Yeah, we tend to look for coffees the coffees that can vary what we're going to use that coffee for. Our main thing is we're always looking for the sweetness. So the coffee always has to be, you know, coffee with at least a moderate to high amount of sweetness. Acidity can vary, but generally, because our roaster does reduce acid in the process, we actually do look for coffees that can be a little bit higher in acid, so that when they come out after roasting, taste fairly balanced.
Got it. Yeah, and for sourcing in coffees that are more developed, I imagine this is also a great concern. So when you're doing your sample roasting of these coffees, your assessment and quality control, imagine depending on what you're trying this for, you have varied standards for that.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, we have different standards for different coffees, and we have some coffees like I was alluding to earlier. We do roast. We have coffees at all different roast levels. So
Yeah.
uh, th- so we have we always take that into consideration for what we're doing.
Talk to me a little bit about both of yours involvement and how soon that happened and how young you were before you started to really get involved in the business. I mean, I imagine it was what, like double digits age or before before you couldn't really hold down a job at 9, I'm sure. But talk to us a little bit about how you got involved and how that changed the dynamic of the business.
For me, I was there when my father. I was in my single digits, I guess you could say, when my father started the company. But I was the company started in the garage. So for a long time. My father did everything himself. We didn't have any employees. He would do all a lot of the sales, the service, the installation, all that. My mom was at home answering the phones, doing the bookkeeping, the payables, the receivables, and all that. So I would help my dad whenever he needed help. He'd go out and install machines or repair machines or just move something around in the garage. And then I guess later on in the 80s, when we started to hire people, and then we also started roasting coffee in the early 80s. I've kind of done it all a little bit, from packaging coffee to service, installations of espresso, repairs, installations of espresso machines. To In the last 30 years, I've been in sourcing and quality, and generally in charge of making sure that the coffee gets, from purchasing the green coffee, to making sure the coffee gets into the bag, basically. So
Everything, right?
everything.
For me, I'm 10 years younger than John. And so I was born in 77. So they couldn't figure out a job position for me when I was 1 year old. So I managed to dodge the family company draft at that time. And
You could
I
have been a taste tester.
yeah, right. Yeah, right. When I was a teenager, I did start to work here in the summers. By that time, I was, I was the first born American in the family. So I was already, my mind was on being outside and playing with my other friends, from the neighborhood or from school. And it was harder for me to develop an interest in the company. I went to college with the idea that I was going to go out and work in finance somewhere after college. And when I graduated, I ended up getting a job as a portfolio accountant for a few years, and then realized I didn't like that, working in that large corporate world, too much. And then I kind of came to the conclusion that I had a great opportunity right in front of me to work for the family business. So I came back and joined the company in 2001. And so I've been here ever since.
You joined right at the beginning of the third wave, really.
Kinda, yeah, a little bit before, but yeah, just definitely around that time.
Okay. And yeah, obviously you were a coffee drinker. And so were you participating as a consumer of other third wave concepts that were around, or kind of pre-third wave?
Yeah, in our own backyard, there was a lot of good coffee already around in Northern California and across the country, of course. I think that the retail side of the business hadn't made the correction yet. You had such success within the realm of specialty coffee with Starbucks and companies and other regional companies. Like here we had obviously Peet's, which has grown to be really, really large over the years, but they were all enjoying so much success that I think that people got a bit carried away with that, and some of the oversight on standards within stores, and local coffee shops didn't get really, keep pace with the growth in the industry and popularity of coffee. You had certain folks or companies that started to sprout up and kind of bring things back to more meticulous methods of preparing coffee. And so, I think here in the Bay Area, you had like Blue Bottle was one of the early companies, and then even Ritual Coffee Roasters in San Francisco. I think both of those companies were at the forefront of third wave in the Bay Area. I think a lot of it had to do with having your own store that you could basically put into practice the concept of maybe using a little bit more coffee, brewing the coffee stronger than people were used to brewing it, pulling your shots of espresso more in line with what like a ristretto shot would be, and adapting that to the lineup of coffee espresso drinks that you would have on your menu accordingly. And then also, steaming milk, pouring it meticulously and in a handcrafted way. I mean, all these little things put together, it was like imagine the way that Peet's coffee must have tasted the first time people drank it back in the 60s and 70s compared to what was out there. And then today, again, that same kind of impact happening when people are drinking a beautifully made cappuccino with latte art on top. I think that was like this whole new experience for people, again, either discovering it for the first time or rediscovering how, really well handcrafted drink could taste. That's what I started to see happening in the early years of my time here. It definitely was very influential.
It's interesting you say it's influential because nobody would have been doing what they were doing had it not been for your father and the business.
Right. We were doing it here, but we were wholesalers. So we were a bit at the behest of what our clients, and our clients are, I mean, obviously what made us, and there were obviously a lot of amazing clients too, but we were a bit at the behest of our clients and what they put in front of their guests. And, and a part of that also was our wholesale clients having to navigate their own clients, the expectations of their own guests. John alluded to this earlier, but there's you probably remember this too, but there's a whole era of espresso in this country where people wanted a shot of espresso to fill up the cup. And we all knew that was BS. And for years tried to get people to, get away from that. But there's a lot of hesitation to pull true, like even anywhere from ristretto to like normale, normal whole. I think most of us, would prefer to see them, pulled ristretto style. But I think there was a lot of hesitation out there until coffee shops actually just started to do it, and that was, a big step there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because third wave really is just everyone collectively reminding each other that we value intentionality. We value being mindful about what we're doing and that there's some reason and purpose behind the actions that we're doing. So we meticulously do this, that, and the other thing, which is exactly what you're all doing. There's the authentic Italian espresso, which was at the heart and is at the heart of the business. And that intentionality, it created a movement in similar fashion. So it's like another generation doing something similar, except they're trying to like create a new tradition in a way. And in the process, I think, rediscovering old traditions and saying, well, we're not inventing the wheel here. Some of this stuff has been around for a long time, which is kind of a beautiful marriage of the two things, the two intentionalities coming together.
Right.
So as that happens now and the business grows, and you got to do this at scale, and you got to serve your wholesale clients, you got to train them. The part of that training is communication about the standards, and you want to maintain your values as you scale the business to the size it is today. Like you started with, the garage, but now you're obviously buying coffee in containers. And so how do you maintain the integrity at scale today?
You have to make the resources available for the clients and push them as well. You have to make an investment in what it requires as far as having barista trainers and representatives of the company that can visit the clients and check on things, make sure that the equipment is being kept up, and also making sure that we're available both, on request for education and training, but also making sure that we're, doing our best to proactively communicate our availability to train and to educate and to follow up with our clients so that they're getting what they need to be able to execute it. It's obviously very challenging with the nature of wholesale and the nature of the food service and hospitality industry. Is it's always, changing, and staffing changes, and it's a bit of a, cat and mouse game at times, just trying to keep up with things. But you just have to do your best.
Yeah, and also I think we know from my father, we've always had a one of his mantras was always, quality over everything. So where maybe a lot of companies, when they get to a certain scale, they start to think, oh well, for a full container, if we save so many cents per pound over 40,000 pounds, that adds up to be like, that's a nice chunk of money we can save. We've never really gone that road. We've always tried to, quality has always been the most important thing in terms of coffee. So we've never really look to cut those corners that a lot of companies are tempted to cut when they get to be a certain size.
Yeah, that's saying a lot. I mean, you could, and at that point, when people get bigger, there's a lot more on the line. These values that guide you are obviously still really strong. And I think obviously that this is a family connection is one of the reasons why some of these have not been conveniently pushed to the back and, in service of efficiency. Because today, I think some of the best coffee bars, and this may be a little bit out of left field, but some of the best coffee bars out there right now are ones that are rooted in traditions, be that Italian or other countries that have coffee cultures. They're small, they're intimate, and they're simple. And people resonate with that and they can sense it. Customers have their own intuition about what values are actually being put into practice. And even at scale, I think you could taste and you can see that these things are true about a company versus someone else that's just very efficient, very slick, but maybe without the soul.
We're not a small company, but we're not a huge company either. We're doing, just about either around or under 1 million pounds of coffee a year. We have about 25 to 30 employees, and I know most of our clients just by name alone. And know most people that we have as clients. We're able to keep pretty close tabs on things. It's still a manageable size for us. We're able to be pretty in touch with what's going on here.
We don't have one or two large customers that makes up the bulk of our sales. We literally have hundreds of customers, customers that, order anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds of coffee a week up to, 50, 100 pounds of coffee a week. So it's nice because we're not dependent on one customer, but it also keeps us on our toes at the same time.
That's great. That's great. Then obviously have to ask about a coffee shop. And first question is, hasn't it crossed your mind to do
it? I'll answer first, but I think John can answer also because I wasn't around during the years when this may have been discussed. But when I arrived here, it seemed like it may have been discussed before, but it never got around to it because the wholesale business grew over the years, and and I think that kept them pretty busy. And I think also our parents, started to get up there in age. I don't think, just honestly speaking here, I don't think that they really wanted to deal with like a coffee shop anymore as they were starting to get up there in years. Because as we all know, running a shop is pretty when you're trying to do a good job, it's pretty intense, requires a lot of attention and work. So the wholesale business is definitely a lot simpler than managing like retail locations. I think John and I and our sister, I think we all knew, you don't have to really explain to us the value of having a retail location and the value that transfers back to the wholesale business. Everyone knows that, so I think finally, after all these years, there was an opportunity that came up here in downtown Oakland, only about a half a mile away from a roastery that was, we looked at the location and signed the lease in January of 2020, and it's right in the heart of downtown Oakland. And it was, really thriving and booming part. Oakland was really kind of going through a revival, and things were really booming down there. It was feeling in the particular location that we're in, it was feeling back then like downtown San Francisco was feeling at that time. It was kind of a really interesting opportunity for us that we finally decided to jump in. John can probably speak more to the why we never opened one before the time that I arrived here.
I think we did a couple instances toss around the idea early on of opening, earlier on of opening a cafe, but I think my parents always wanted to stay focused on the wholesale. I think they thought it would detract from the wholesale business. So they also felt like it's something they didn't really know how to do. So that they didn't want to go that way at a certain point.
Yeah. Well, here we are 45 years later, and good things come to those who wait, right? So you got a shop now that's a month old, and I want to ask about just what goes into a coffee shop that is featuring authentic Italian espresso in using modern equipment and everything else. They're really not that different. The equipment has been over the years. There's obviously some pretty big technological advances, but hot water, coffee, under pressure. But what does it look like for you to have a cafe that's different than any other cafe because of who you are?
There's a lot about us that's unique. A large part of that happens to be connected with the Italian coffee tradition, but we're not just an Italian company. We're also, an American company. We're a Northern Californian company. We're a Bay Area company. We're an Oakland company. The Italian coffee roasting and espresso tradition is definitely like a key building block or foundation for our company. But I was born here. John's been here most of his life, and so is my sister. So we're not walking around, waving Italian flags every day. Right? It's like we like different types of food, and we like different types of experiences, and so all that funnels into like the coffee concept here, where obviously you can get great Italian espresso, and ultimately the style of our roasting and coffee, is evidenced in the cup of coffee that you'll drink there. But we also have coffees that reflect more of the times in the coffee industry of today, and making sure that we're able to not only sell coffee to traditionalists, but people who are also looking for coffee that's fun and on trend too.
When Luigi touched on the fact that we're not just an Italian company, but we're also a California-based company, an Oakland-based company, and our coffee reflects that. I think, in Italy, I'm sure a lot of people understand the Italian coffee market, that they're kind of handcuffed by the idea that an espresso has to be a euro. That kind of limits a lot of the choices they can make as far as the coffees they can buy. Because we're in the US and we have the market's different, our customers can charge $3-4 for an espresso. That takes the handcuffs off of us. We're able to buy, coffees they couldn't buy in Italy. So our coffee is kind of a hybrid. I like to say it's Italian inspired, but it's also made for the US market. As an Italian roaster, if we had just been making blends that were 50% Robusta and 50% Arabica, and that were, a lower price, we probably wouldn't have had the success that we have today. In Italy, they're used to, with Italian cuisine, in Italian coffee, they're used to making something out of simple ingredients. And a lot of that with Italian coffee is corrected by the fact that they're able to put sugar in the coffee. But that's very different here. Most American consumers, especially consumers of specialty coffee, don't use sugar. So we had to develop blends that with a little bit higher degree of complexity and sweetness that would taste good with or without sugar. So we do still encourage people to drink it with sugar, but a lot of American consumers don't. So it has to kind of taste good both ways. So there's a lot of, Italians when they come to this country, they miss the coffee that they have in Italy, but then a lot of times they'll find us and they'll stand and, they gravitate towards our coffee. And a lot of them will say that actually our coffee, sometimes they'll even say that our coffee is better than the coffee in Italy. But at the same time, we're also trying to please, all tastes. So our coffee is not a carbon copy of, let's say, that what you would maybe find in Italy.
What I find interesting here is that, you've supplied people with coffee in the Bay Area, but, you were supplying espresso back in the day to Alice Waters, right? And,
Correct. Yeah.
Famous restaurants and media people, it just like you have such a deep history, and it might feel like there's a lot of pressure to, really showcase the coffees so well in the space because everyone's been trained by you who uses your coffee, who knows the brand. What goes into the training for your people and the standards that you set up for the cafe to make good on those expectations?
Well, for us, it starts with all of the procedures and steps that go into making a high quality drink. And our recipes and menu and the way we make a latte or a cappuccino are going to be somewhat in line with, pretty well established standards out there that we all know about. However, we're going to, there's going to be our own interpretations of certain types of drinks and our ideal way of making drink X versus drink Y, and so we ultimately, create our own recipes for each drink that we have on our menu and then execute on those drinks as best that we can without compromising or cutting corners. That's all pretty straightforward though. I mean, I think what helps that we've been doing this and we know kind of what we're after, and it's just a matter of doing it. And so we have to train our staff and just like anyone else does and make sure that they're meeting the standards before they're producing drinks and whatnot.
Right. And so 1 month in, how has the reception been to the cafe?
So far, so good. We've been getting good reviews from our customers and online. And we had some good buzz in the media after we first opened. For the most part, I think it's been well received. I don't know if I mentioned, but we also, you may have read about this, but the format of the cafe is a bit different too, in that it's we're trying to, in a way, recreate Italian coffee bar service without trying to make it identical. As you probably know, like when you go to a cafe or a coffee bar in Italy, usually you pay by the door. Someone who, like a cashier, oftentimes they're at their own like little station or counter where you pay them and then they give you a receipt and then you show your receipt at the bar to validate that you paid at the barista, and you'll just say, hey, I ordered a coffee, and then they'll show them the receipt or the ticket, and then they'll serve you. That system probably wouldn't work here in the United States. It's kind of too complicated or too different maybe. We created a big long bar, a 17-foot long bar at the front of the cafe space. When you walk in, you see it right away. We're encouraging our customers to not form a line, but just to belly up to the bar and order their coffee like they're at a bar. Try and create a little bit of a different ambiance around ordering coffee. And operationally for us too, we believe that it helps us to be more efficient, not only in the order taking, but in the order making. The customers don't have to feel like they're waiting in a single file line, experiencing the typical bottlenecks that you encounter when you're in a coffee shop, having to wait in line first to pay for your drink, but also after you pay for your drink, you also kind of have to wait in line again to wait for your drink. So we're trying to reduce that entire front and back end bottleneck down by kind of breaking the line apart and trying to facilitate smoother and faster order taking and then getting the drinks out quicker too.
Well, that's wonderful. There is a lot of comfort in just being at the bar itself. Like I've arrived. I don't mind waiting. If I'm at the bar, I'm just like hanging out in the middle of a sea of people on a concrete floor,
Yeah. Especially when you're waiting in line, the person in front of you is dictating when you get to order and so forth, the person in front of them too. Just little things like, looking for your wallet or getting your card out or, looking at the menu, trying to decide what you're going to drink or how quickly the person takes your card or processes it or takes the order. Oftentimes when you go to a cafe too, when you order by the time you do get to order, your ticket may not print until after you've paid. So you're actually by the time you're done paying, that's when your ticket's been printed. But it's kind of like, well, how many drinks are you behind at that point too? And so we're trying to get the drink orders out of the customers earlier on in the transaction so that we can come back to them after. We'll just write the name of the drink on the cup and then pass it to the barista, and then they can start working on it. And then the bartender, or per se, who's the person who's taking the order, can just go back to the customer and finish grabbing pastry or finish ringing them up while the drink ideally is already underway.
I like it. Yeah, definitely. One of those things that is constantly a battle in cafes is thinking about, systems that we want to put in place to benefit the customer, tweaking that all the time. And it sounds like you've got a really great system set up to do just that. As we wrap up here, I'm struck by the fact that there's just an incredible amount of, more questions I could ask and information. But one of the things that I know is true is, out of all the people listening to us today, there are people that everybody has the potential to create a legacy and an impact and a difference in their particular community. You all have been doing that for so long. I wanted to ask you both, what advice would you give these entrepreneurs to be able to develop their businesses in a way that will be seen as, consistent and excellent over time? What's the secret?
I think the key is really to try and create something that's authentic to them, something that resonates with them, because the chances are, if they have an interest in something, there's other people out there who are interested in the same thing. There's probably a need for it. And just rather than trying to look around to see what other people are doing, look within yourself to see what you want to do, what your approach, what your style is going to be. And also at the same time, just keep an eye on quality and make sure you're providing a consistently high quality product that you can be proud of.
I was going to say the same thing that John just said. What you're doing has to come from within you. So you have to decide what it is that you like about coffee and the way you like to present it. Approach it from that way rather than trying to imitate what else is out there already. It'll become more meaningful that way, and it'll be, like John said, more authentic. It'll probably produce better results too. And consumers, especially today, they love that more and more all the time. Everyone likes a different point of view now, which is great. And aside from that, it's just also just, be consistent and persistent, put the time in, and it's not going to come easy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That too. Yeah, it's to be prepared to work harder than you probably have ever worked before. So it's not easy. It's a lot of work.
Well, this all sounds like exactly what your father did, and
yes,
it's relevant today just as much as it was then. So thank you both for taking time to talk to us and share about the history of this wonderful company. And I appreciate all that you've shared with us and the work that you do to keep the tradition going. And where can we learn more about Mr. Espresso?
Our website is www.mrespresso.com. It's MRESPRESSO.com. And then our Instagram handle is Mr. Espresso Oak, MRESPRESSOAK. The oak is like a double meaning for oakwood roasted, and also for Oakland. Those are probably to get information about the company. And then the Instagram is where we kind of have more of our current goings on of the business. So it's a good way to keep in touch with what we're doing. The Instagram handle for the cafe is The Cafe. Cafe is spelled with 2 F's, so it's The Cafe, CAFFE, Oak, OAK, similar in configuration to the Mr. Espresso.
Luigi, John, I really appreciate both of you. Thank you so much. And it was great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us, Chris.
Well, I hope that you all really enjoyed that conversation. And if anything out of this, I really want you to explore the idea that the world of specialty coffee and high standards and really having intentional decisions for everything that we do is not a new idea. This is something that's been going on for a long, long time. And Mr. Espresso is just a testimony to that fact. And I love that, they have such deep intuition about what's right for their business, and that it's not the kind of thing where they're just jumping on trends unless it makes sense for who they are. And having a sense of who you are, what your passion is, what your values are, keeps you on the straight and narrow. And really, over time, it creates such a magnificent impact and legacy, just as it has with Mr. Espresso all of these years. And that'll keep you on the straight and narrow and build that kind of a legacy and impact that a company like Mr. Espresso has just demonstrated is possible. So huge thank you to John and Luigi DiRuocco for joining me on this podcast. If you're interested in learning more about Mr. Espresso, you can do that by visiting their website, mrespresso.com. That's mrespresso.com. And definitely stop by their cafe in Oakland when you're in the area. So if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode, please do reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com. If you're also interested in Keys to the Shop consulting or signing up for the inaugural Keyholder Coaching Group coming up in September, go ahead and email me there as well, chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed getting to learn about Mr. Espresso, their legacy, and all that goes into it, and that truly was inspiring to you. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, share the show with your friends, with your family, with your team, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.